Welcome to Sikorsky Memorial Airport in Stratford, Connecticut, once the home of both the Sikorsky and Vought aircraft companies. Today is the birthday of the F4U Corsair, which flew from this very factory on May 29, 1940, now 81 years ago. Not only will we talk about the history of the aircraft itself, but we'll be using it to visit several points of interest around Connecticut and Long Island Sound. The Northeast was once one of the leading industrial centers of the United States, and the Corsair is the official state aircraft of Connecticut due to its connections to so many businesses there. New England and Connecticut in particular were centers of pioneering aviation technology, and some even argue that German immigrant Gustav Whitehead made the first powered flight right here in Bridgeport, beating the Wright brothers by 2 years. President Roosevelt described the industrial might of the U.S. as the arsenal of democracy. So, today we'll be exploring some of the sites of this arsenal that produced famous World War II hardware, as well as a few bonus sites along the way. We're in the cockpit now of our Corsair, painted up with the white arrow and yellow nose that signifies that she's an F4U-1D that flew with VF-84 from the USS Bunker Hill in 1945. Milviz, the company that created this plane for flight simulator, identifies this as an FG-1 Corsair, meaning that it was built by Goodyear out in Ohio. But since there's realistically almost no difference between an FG-1 and an F4U-1, and we're departing from the Vought plant, I'm deciding that today we're in a true blue F4U. Alright, so as we get started, just fair warning that there's going to be a lot of talking in this video. This isn't really a how-to-fly video or a review of the game Corsair. Really, it's a love letter to the real plane, enjoying seeing it fly, and being able to share interesting research with you. As always, if you're interested in reading more about anything that I talk about here, make sure to look in the description for links to all of my various resources. While I finish up going through the startup checklist, let's talk about the Vought Aircraft Company, who designed and built this aircraft. Vought was founded in 1917 by two men, Chauncey Vought and Birdseye Lewis. Chauncey, later going by Chance Vought, had previously been chief engineer at the Wright Aircraft Company, and he was looking to take advantage of the growing interest in the aviation market following World War I. The company developed a particularly good relationship with the naval services and created a series of early aircraft for the Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard. Vought originally operated from a factory in Queens, New York, producing a steady stream of aircraft, including the original Corsair, the O2U, which, from 1926 to 1930, was one of the Navy's primary fighters. In 1929, Vought ceased to be its own independent company when it became part of the new aviation behemoth, the United Aircraft and Transport Corporation. This nationwide corporation, formed by Boeing and Pratt Whitney, united 15 different businesses from all aspects of aviation into a single entity. With the merger, the Vought Corporation opened a new 175,000 square foot factory at Rentschler Field in East Hartford, Connecticut, adjacent to the Pratt Whitney and Hamilton Standard facilities. This factory opened in 1930, unfortunately the same year that Chance Vought unexpectedly died from blood poisoning. He died only 2 days after another legendary aviation figure, Glenn Curtiss. Despite Vaught's death, his company continued to find success through the 1930s, gaining a reputation for superior workmanship and aircraft. In 1939, United Aircraft moved the Vought division to a larger factory in Stratford, Connecticut, and merged it with Sikorsky Aviation. The Vought-Sikorsky division would only last a few years before being split again, but while together, the Stratford plant manufactured S-43 and VS-44 flying boats, Kingfisher scout planes, F4U Corsairs, and Sikorsky's line of experimental and production helicopter models. During and after World War II, Vought also constructed several experimental and prototype aircraft. One of the more radical designs was the V-173 Flying Pancake, a circular flying wing with no fuselage. The Pancake made almost 200 flights, and its flying saucer shape led to UFO reports from locals all along the shore. The F4U Pirate was the company's first jet, and while unimpressive overall, it was the first U.S. Navy fighter to use an afterburner.
Cessna November 1442 Lima, pushback request accepted.
Bridgeport ground, Corsair 122 ready to taxi departure to the east with Sierra.
Corsair 122 taxi, 2 right hold short of runway 29er via taxiway cross runway 24. Contact tower on 120.9er when ready.
Taxiing hold short runway 29er using taxiway cross runway 24 Corsair 122.
In 1948, Vought relocated its factory to Dallas, Texas, after the Navy voiced concerns that having both Vought and Grumman, its two largest suppliers, in the same area was strategically unwise. Continuing to build jets for the Navy as well as diversifying into missiles and other components, Vought once again became an independent company in 1954, fully separating from United Aircraft. 3 years later, they began production on the F-8 Crusader, a record-setting supersonic fighter that saw action in Vietnam. Vaught's last successful aircraft was the A-7 Corsair II, a ground attack aircraft that began production in 1965. Vought was bought out several more times over the years, including by Northrop Grumman at one point, until finally being acquired by the Triumph Group in 2010. Vought continues to operate as a component manufacturing division, contributing flight control surfaces and other parts to various Airbus and Boeing models, as well as several military aircraft. You saw some traffic there just off the right wing as we S-turn our way down to the active here at Bridgeport Airport. It's just after 8 o'clock, so we should be getting some good sun as we head up the Connecticut River Valley up into the rest of Connecticut. We're going to hold short up here, and then after we get permission, we're going to back taxi down runway 29 for takeoff.
Bridgeport Tower Corsair 122 ready for east departure at runway 29er.
Corsair 122 cleared for takeoff runway 29er, east departure approved.
Cleared for takeoff runway 29er Corsair 122.
Flip the gun sight on as we make our way down to the turnaround here at the end of the runway. Once we get lined up on the center line, we'll lock the tail wheel, stand on the brakes. We'll give it a little bit of power, make sure the engine stabilizes, and then we'll release the brakes and we'll go to full takeoff power, 54 inches manifold pressure on the R2800.
Bridgeport Tower, generic November 359er, 1 kilo ready at runway 29er departure to the west. Generic November 359er, 1 kilo, hold short runway 29er. Traffic is on the runway.
Tail should start coming up at around 60 knots, and then we'll lift off just a little past that. Full right rudder, we're still sliding left just a little bit, and we'll correct as the tail comes up. Flaps are coming up.
Corsair 122 continue for east departure. I will contact you next when you leave my airspace.
Bridgeport Tower Corsair 122 continue for east departure.
And we're not actually going to depart east just yet. We're going to come around into the downwind, and we'll make a pass, a low altitude, high speed pass on the Vought factory as we depart. This is the Long Island Sound out in front of us. This is looking south from the shore of Connecticut. You can see the Bridgeport Airport out on this little sort of swampy peninsula. You can see the sun is just starting to peek out around the edge of this cloud that's been sort of obscuring it. Out to the left off the wingtip, that's the Housatonic River flowing into the ocean after coming all the way down from western Massachusetts through Connecticut. And just out there off the right wingtip, that's Long Island itself on the south side of the Sound. Coming around now back on the Vought-Sikorsky factory. We'll pass by on the right side. We're headed out over the Sound now to pick up some altitude, and then we'll swing back around over the top of Bridgeport at 20,000 feet. Our first stop today is going to be East Hartford, Connecticut, so to get there, we're going to recreate a famous episode in the Corsair's history. On October 1st, 1940, test pilot Lyman Bullard made a trip from Bridgeport to Hartford at high speed, and this flight is almost always incorrectly associated with the Corsair breaking 400 miles per hour in flight. For example, here's a quote from a Corsair reference book. On October 1st, 1940, Bullard set a world speed record in the XF4U-1 when he reached 405 miles per hour in level flight, a first for a single-engine fighter. Some version of this statement is what is found in almost every internet article and in many respectable books, but it's not right. Vought never claimed a world record. The piston engine record at the time had been set in 1939 by Fritz Vendel in the Messerschmitt Me-209 at 469 miles per hour, a record that would hold until 1969. Record attempts at the time required a run in both directions to eliminate tailwind components, and Bullard's flight only went one way. Most importantly, the 405 miles per hour was specified by Vought as Bullard's ground speed, not an airspeed. Ground speed isn't an effective measure of performance against other aircraft specifically because it is determined by wind. You want airspeed compared with airspeed. The Navy's official service acceptance trials provided a more accurate measurement of the XF4U's performance, citing 371 miles per hour at altitude with a useful load. So, did the XF4U ever actually break the 400 miles per hour airspeed? Actually, it did. It just didn't happen on the date, in the place, or with the pilot that everyone always reports. The official Navy speed trial happened on November 15th, 1940, a month and a half after the Hartford flight, over a real range set up by the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics on the shore of the Chesapeake Bay, in the vicinity of Norfolk, Virginia. The pilot was Frederick Trapnell, a Navy pilot considered the best, most experienced naval test aviator of his generation. The XF4U was specially rigged to minimize drag. Its radio mast and antenna were removed, and the handholds and gun ports were all covered in tape. At 22,500 feet, Trapnell made 4 runs over the course, twice in each direction. When he landed, the ground crew excitedly told him that the official speed was calculated at 402 miles per hour. The Navy even issued a statement that ran in the Washington Daily News on December 20th, 1940, describing the F4U as the fastest airplane in the United States today. This publicity and support certainly saved the Corsair program, which was experiencing a host of maneuverability and range problems at the time. But it's hard to tell if the statement was actually true. The XP-38 Lightning is also often pointed to as the first 400-mile-per-hour fighter, although there is also some doubt about that. The XP-38 was calculated to top 400 based on test flight data, but the evidence isn't clear if it actually did so before it crashed in 1939. In the rest of the world, the Germans still held the world speed record. Even though they had done it in a devoted racer, they sneakily renamed the aircraft the Me-109R when they did it, to associate it with the Me-109 fighter, a disinformation move that gave the impression that a single-engine fighter had set the record. Even if you leave the Germans aside, there is another contender for the title of fastest fighter, as the British Spitfire Mark III first flew in March of 1940, 2 months before the Corsair, and that plane was also capable of 400 miles an hour. So it's very unlikely that the Corsair was setting any world records. It's true that it may have been the fastest US fighter, or maybe just the fastest with a single engine, at least for a short time before the P-47 arrived, but even so, that record was not set in the time and place that it is most often attributed to. The entire business of speed setting at the time is so convoluted and misremembered, sifting through the details to crown a speed king is a difficult task. And it's sort of a moot point anyways, as by the end of the war, fighters of all nations were routinely blasting way past the 400 marker. Late model production Corsairs were reaching almost 450 miles per hour in level flight, well beyond what the prototype XF4U had been able to accomplish. So here we are, up at 20,000 feet, full power, just over 300 knots indicated, and we're on our way to Meriden. In fact, we're about to cross over the Meriden NDB. We saw on startup how I tuned the ADF to 238 for the Meriden NDB, the non-directional beacon, and that's the only navigation equipment on board this aircraft, which is a little bit problematic because NDBs are going away, or in many cases are already gone. But there's still a few around we can tune into. So crossing over Meriden means that we're halfway to Hartford, which is actually just ahead of us there, just underneath the nose. I can see the runways at Hartford Brainerd coming into view. And listening outside the aircraft just now, we heard the distinctive whistling noise of the wind going through the oil and intercoolers at the base of the wing roots. This is the basis of the story that the Japanese called this airplane the Whistling Death. However, I think that's yet another sort of mythical story that's been promoted through the years that's not true. Most records show that the Japanese referred to this as a Sikorsky, if anything. So, Whistling Death, probably something made up by American PR, maybe even Vought itself. Okay, still up at 300 knots. Coming over the top of Hartford Brainerd and Rentschler Field right down there underneath the airplane. So that means that we have reached the end point of our trip. We've gone from Bridgeport to Hartford. It's a 41 nautical mile trip, which we covered in 7 minutes, giving us a ground speed of 351 knots. If we convert that we're at 403 miles per hour, which is only 2 miles an hour slower than the real XF4U set on its high-speed run to Hartford in October of 1940. However, again, that's ground speed. So if we take a look at our indicated airspeed, we were doing between 300 and 310 knots on the way in, which is around the neighborhood of 345 miles per hour. If we do some calculations for the thinner air at 20,000 feet, our true airspeed was closer to 420 knots, which would be 483 miles per hour. So we were actually zipping along very fast, much, much faster than the XF4U1, but ground speed-wise, we did the trip in almost the exact amount of time, so we must have had a bit of a headwind today. And there's downtown Hartford, very, very clear now. You can see Route 8491 going through it. And actually, we're circling right over the top of West Hartford, which, yep, right there. I can actually see my old neighborhood. I lived in West Hartford for about 10 years. And my house that I rented was right down there in that neighborhood. And the generic building models don't do it justice, because that's not actually what the houses look like. But this was my street that I lived on until 2016. Rentschler Field was an airport in East Hartford that was in operation from 1929 until 1999. This was one of United Aircraft Corporation's largest facilities, if not the largest, for many years. It was home to Pratt Whitney, Hamilton Standard, and Vought for most of the 1930s. It was named for Frederick Rentschler, the founder of Pratt Whitney Aircraft. Rentschler was originally from Ohio and was another ex-employee of the Wright brothers who wanted to strike out and start a company of his own. Feeling that the best airplane could only be designed around the best engine, he began to assemble a design team and funds to start an aviation engine company. Through his connections, he found a company with factory space and capital to spare in the Pratt & Whitney Machine Tool Company of Hartford. This original Pratt & Whitney, which by the way still operates today as a separate company, was founded in 1860. In 1927, Pratt & Whitney struck a deal in which they loaned Rentschler $250,000, allowed him the use of the company name, and space to work in their downtown factory on Capitol Avenue. Pratt & Whitney Aircraft Company, the new entity under Rentschler, sold their first engines, the Wasp and the Hornet, to the Navy, and within 2 years business was so good they needed to move to larger facilities. Rentschler had become friends with William Boeing of Seattle, who used Pratt & Whitney engines on his aircraft, and the two decided to merge companies and create an integrated maker of airplanes and engines. This was the creation of the United Aircraft and Transport Corporation of 1929. Pratt & Whitney moved into new facilities on a small field in East Hartford, which would by 1932 be known as Rentschler Field. Pratt would eventually have additional facilities scattered throughout the state of Connecticut, including a large one in North Haven, where in 1970 my grandfather worked on the design team for the F-100 jet engine, still the power plant for both the F-15 and F-16 fighter. Another addition to United Aircraft during its formation were Hamilton Aero Manufacturing of Milwaukee and Standard Steel Propeller of Pittsburgh. Both were moved to Rentschler Field and combined to create Hamilton Standard. Hamilton Standard almost immediately made one of the most important contributions to aviation history when they invented the variable pitch propeller in the early 1930s. Later refinements included the introduction of constant speed, full feathering, and reversible propellers. Designer Frank Caldwell won the 1933 Collier Trophy for this advance in flight propulsion. Hamilton Standard propellers saw extensive use on interwar airliners. During World War II, Hamilton and its licensees built over 500,000 propellers for warplanes, equipping 75% of all American aircraft. The company also exported props for use on British Lancasters and Mosquitoes. Hamilton Standard remained on Rentschler Field until 1952, when they would move to a new facility at Bradley Airport. And as we complete our run over the field, we're up and over the top of the new Rentschler Field. Recently built on the end of what used to be one of the runways, That is the new athletic field for the University of Connecticut, now also known as Rentschler Field, different kind of field. We'll be back to Hartford in a little bit, but for now, let's head north up the Connecticut River to Bradley International Airport in Windsor Locks. Dropping down into the river valley now for a high-speed, low-altitude run, coming right down next to the old Hartford landfill off to our left. Turk's Island coming into view in the middle of the river up ahead, which means that we're nearing the north end of Windsor, about to cross over into Windsor Locks. And there, over the top of Turk's Island. Over the top of Route 91, there's the Route 140 bridge just ahead. Dexter Paper Company off to our left along with the Windsor Locks Canal, and over the center of town as we pull up away out of the river. The New England Air Museum is an aviation museum in Windsor Locks that specializes in preserving the history of local New England aviation. The Connecticut Aeronautical Historical Association was founded in 1959. By the 1960s, a small collection of aircraft had been accumulated and was organized into the Bradley Air Museum, named for its first location on the south side of Bradley Airport along Route 75. By the 70s, the museum had a sizable fleet of aircraft and was displaying them both indoors in a hangar and in an outside area. On October 3, 1979, just before 3 in the afternoon, a tornado formed and touched down in Windsor, a very rare event in Connecticut. In only 10 minutes, the tornado tore through Windsor, Windsor Locks, and up into southern Massachusetts, traveling right over Bradley Airport and almost completely destroying the Air Museum. Both of my parents, working at the museum, narrowly avoided being killed. Heavy rain had kept visitors away all day, and my mother, working in the outdoor display yard ticket booth, closed up shop and drove the short distance to the museum hangar. Just a few minutes after she left, the tornado arrived, smashing her admissions booth to pieces. The roof was ripped off the giant indoor display hangar, where the employees were taking cover behind the ticket counter. The museum's C-133 Cargo Master, weighing 60 tons, was picked up, flipped onto its back with its nose and tail section ripped off. 30 aircraft had been on display outside. 16 were completely destroyed. 10 were thought to be salvageable, and only 4 escaped serious damage. After nearly 2 years, a single new building went up in 1981, and a decades-long process of repairing damaged aircraft began. Since then, 6 new buildings have been constructed over the years, and the museum continues to expand. Now we're over Hamilton Standard's second site. Underneath this building was the site of a German POW camp during World War II. 250 German enlisted men were detained at the camp starting in 1944. By all accounts, they were treated well, there were no escape attempts, and they did work around the airbase like cutting firewood, kitchen duty, and vehicle maintenance. Some were even loaned out to local tobacco farmers for field work. Hamilton moved here in 1952, by this time phasing out propeller production and moving into fuel control systems for jets. Hamilton standard fuel controls were used on Pratt Whitney engines, powering classic airliners like the Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8. The company then expanded into environmental systems and cabin pressurization. Hamilton became a contractor for NASA during the space race, providing environmental control, fuel cell, and life support systems for the Apollo landers. My other grandfather worked here and designed pressure relief valves and other components for the Apollo lander. As we cross back over the south end of the airport, we can look down and get a real good look at the ramp down at the Connecticut Air National Guard. The Guard first became operational here at Bradley in 1946, being equipped with P-47 Thunderbolts. When I was a kid, they flew A-10s out of here, which they acquired in the late 70s, and they had all the way up until 2008. They switched to C-21 Learjets as a placeholder for a short time, and now they've transitioned to C-130s within the last 5 to 10 years or so. The Connecticut Army National Guard has a presence here too, and they fly Blackhawks out of the north end of the base from the Army Aviation Support Facility. We're over East Granby, Connecticut now as we're circling around the back side of the airport once again. We're going to follow the ridge line here, head back up north, and then cut back over to the river. So over Suffield, there's the river. We're going to cut back over. Enfield's on the far side. And just there at the top of that hill in the clearing, that's actually athletic fields. That's Enfield High School. That's where I went to high school. And we're going to come right over the top of it here. And that means that we're only about a mile away from where I grew up, which is just on the north side of this bridge here. That's the Route 190 bridge crossing the Connecticut River. Thompsonville, just north of that, which is a section of the larger town of Enfield. That's where I grew up. In fact, right down there. That was my neighborhood. We can see the Enfield Lumber Company, Freshwater Pond, and the Bigelow Mills. The Hartford Bigelow Carpet Mills were founded by Orrin Thompson, for whom Thompsonville is named, in 1828. By the end of the century, the mill was the largest carpet manufacturer in the country, employing 13,000 workers in the 1920s. Most of the surrounding residential area was mill housing built by the company between 1830 and 1920. Demand for Bigelow's products began to fall during the Great Depression, and operations were slowly reduced through the 1950s until the mills closed completely in the mid-60s. The old buildings were eventually refurbished into upscale apartments, and the site is now a residential community. Enfield didn't have a lot of specific contributions to World War II, but on the east side of the town is Hazardville, where Colonel Hazard's powder company supplied 1/3 of all of the gunpowder used by the Union forces during the Civil War. And back over the top of the old neighborhood. That's Kelly Fredette Lumber down on Prospect Street on the left, Spring Street in the middle, Pearl Street up on the right, heading back towards the freshwater pond in the center of Thompsonville. Zooming out the other side, we're back over Enfield High, right over the athletic fields. And as we'll pull up and over, we'll come over Route 5. There's the church steeple. I had a friend who lived right next door to that church. And over the top of the nuns at the Felician Sisters Convent. And there's Route 91 heading north up to Springfield, which is where we are heading next. We'll come around, we'll head right over the top of the Enfield Mall. Heading north here on the right side of the river, we're going to pass out of Enfield, cross over the Massachusetts state line, and then go over Longmeadow before reaching Springfield, which we can just see ahead of us there at the bend of the river. Coming over the south end of the city, there's the Route 5 bridge crossing the river. And the Basketball Hall of Fame is going to be just a little north of that, between the river and the highway. There it is, recognizable by the large ball on the front of it. There's the Springfield Memorial Bridge just off the wingtip. Below us is the Springfield Armory, at a site recommended by General Henry Knox and approved by George Washington in 1777. Personally scouting the site, Washington agreed that the location was defensible and was geographically well located. After storing weapons and manufacturing ammunition during the Revolution, the armory became one of the primary ammunition and weapons arsenals for the country. When the Civil War began in 1861, it was one of only 2 national armories in the States, and the second one at Harper's Ferry was almost immediately seized by the Confederates. This left Springfield Armory as the only manufacturer of the Union Army's main infantry rifle, the M1855. Master armorers and engineers worked at the armory, always attempting to improve firearm technology. In 1919, John Grummand came to Springfield to develop a semi-automatic rifle, working until 1936, when the U.S. Army finally adopted his M1. Springfield Armory would produce 4.5 million M1 Gurrands over its production run. The rifle was singled out for praise by both Generals MacArthur and Patton. The Armory's last weapon was the M14 rifle, produced from 1959 to 1964. In 1968, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara announced the closure of the Springfield Armory as a cost-saving move. The site was turned over to the state, and today is a National Historic Site called the Springfield Armory Museum. Just ahead of the nose on the right side of the river is Six Flags New England, but was originally known as Riverside Park. While this doesn't have any actual bearing on World War II, it would have been a prominent site if we were actually flying this route in the 1940s. The park was first opened as a picnic park in 1870, with most visitors arriving by steamship. In 1911, the first roller coasters were built, and after difficulties during the Great Depression, Riverside reopened in 1940 to become the largest amusement park in New England. The large white roller coaster at the north end is the Thunderbolt, purchased from the 1939 New York World's Fair and opened at Riverside in 1941, making it the oldest operating coaster in Massachusetts. Riverside also built a quarter-mile oval racetrack in 1948, taking advantage of the popularity in auto racing following the war. Stock car racing was very popular in the 1960s, and NASCAR began holding events there in 1976. The racetrack was demolished in 1999 when Six Flags purchased the park. Back over Enfield and the 190 bridge one last time. We're going to follow the river back down to the south until we reach Hartford. East winds are out to our left, and out to our right, below us there, is Kings Island, the large landmass in the middle of the river. with the railroad bridge just beyond it. Back over Route 91 as it heads south, ultimately to New Haven. And let's pull the mixture back to auto lean. Now that we're just back in cruise. 34 inches manifold pressure. We'll set our cruise RPM. And there's Bradley Airport. Again out to our right, so now we're passing by on the other side heading south. I can see the approach lights at Hartford Brainerd out ahead of us there. And there's the Hartford landfill coming into view. And Rentschler Field, Pratt Whitney out to our left. We're actually going to be right across the river from that in just a moment. The landfill was a very prominent landmark for a long time, actually since the 40s. This landfill has been here longer than any of the development around it. Been here longer than the highway, even. And that closed sometime in the early 2000s. Now it's just capped off. Okay, so here's downtown Hartford coming up, and there's the Route 84 bridge. Another huge contributor to the battlefield of World War II was the Colt Armory, opened by Samuel Colt in 1855. While not represented well here in the sim, the real buildings are large 19th century mill-type structures, and we should be seeing a large onion-shaped dome painted blue in the middle of the main armory building. On top of the dome is a golden horse rearing up on its hind legs. Here, the Colt Company produced the single-action revolvers used in the Civil War and the American Wild West. Samuel Colt built housing and a recreation hall for his workers, and in an attempt to attract German craftsmen to his factory, planted German trees in the area and built a village based on one near Potsdam, Germany. In 1921, Colt produced 15,000 Thompsons under license, and during World War II produced over 600,000 M1911 pistols, as well as the M1917 water-cooled machine gun. 15,000 men and women in 3 factories ran on 3 shifts 24 hours a day, winning the Army-Navy rating of E for excellence. In the 1960s, Colt produced the M16 rifle for the military and later M4 carbines. The company vacated the site in 1994, moving to a more modern facility just down the road in West Hartford. The armory and its surrounding area is now the Coltsville National Historic Park. The Corsair began development in 1938 and was designed from the start around the 2,000 horsepower R2800 double wasp radial. A Pratt Whitney engine, the R2800 is an air-cooled radial with 18 cylinders, arranged in 2 rows, and has a displacement of 2,800 cubic inches. The engine was introduced in 1939, and the A series, producing around 1,800 horsepower, was used in early B-26s and C-46 Commandos. The uprated B series began with Corsair production and improved horsepower to 2,000. The engine that we have here in our F4U-1D is the water-injected R2800-8W, with a 2-stage supercharger and a total output of 2,250 horsepower. The Vought design team, led by Rex Beisel and including Igor Sikorsky, had several obstacles to overcome. The most notable was to find a way to make the plane's 13-foot propeller clear the ground while still making the plane rugged enough for carrier landings. The plane's signature inverted gull-wing design allowed for shorter, sturdy landing gear while maintaining prop clearance. The prototype XF4U-1, fitted with the prototype B-Series engine, made its maiden flight on May 29, 1940 from the Vought factory in Stratford, with test pilot Lyman Bullard at the controls. The long nose and the original birdcage canopy of the Corsair, combined with low-speed handling problems from the high-torque engine, made carrier landing difficult for inexperienced pilots. While 2 Navy squadrons successfully completed carrier qualifications and reported that it was easy to land aboard, the Navy cleared the Corsair for land operations only. They chose instead to equip seagoing squadrons with F6F Hellcats, which had better spare parts supplies and were more forgiving to young pilots. The Marine Corps, though, already operating from land bases in the Pacific and badly in need of a replacement for their F4F Wildcats, eagerly accepted the new fighter, and it was the Marines who put the Corsair into its first combat in February 1943. 4 months later, by May, 2nd Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124 became the very first Corsair ace. Back in Stratford, a familiar face around the Vought plant was that of aviation superstar Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh had become world famous for his transatlantic flight to France in 1927, and in 1943 was hired as a technical consultant for the United Aircraft Corporation. He made hundreds of Corsair test flights, and was a constant member of engineering conferences. Aged 41, Lindbergh convinced the Navy to let him go to the Pacific to fly Corsairs under combat conditions to collect data. He ended up spending 6 months in the South Pacific, flying 178 hours, over 50 combat missions in both Corsairs and Army P-38s, returning to Connecticut with complete records on fighter aircraft, their performance, and their problems in combat. While the American Navy remained indecisive about the Corsair, the British had no such reservations. Corsairs under the Lend-Lease Act were delivered to the Royal Navy in November of 1943, and the Fleet Air Arm put them to use right away. The British, always pioneers in aircraft carrier technology, were operating Corsairs at sea by early 1944, 9 months ahead of the U.S. Navy. Back in the States, though, the Navy's major hang-up was the plane's tendency to bounce on landing, especially in the hands of rookie pilots. Vought launched Program Dog to improve the oleo struts of the landing gear, and in 10 days eliminated the built-in bounce of the Corsair. The results were so impressive after testing, the Navy immediately declared the Corsair acceptable for carrier duty. The demand for Corsairs, both at home and abroad, was so high, Vought contracted out their production to additional companies, with each manufacturer receiving its own designation. Brewster Aeronautical Corporation and Goodyear Aircraft were both awarded contracts in 1941. Brewster Corsairs were known as F3A-1s. Only 735 F3As were built, and they were plagued with problems. Goodyear planes were designated FG-1. All Corsairs were built to Vought specifications, and other than the poor workmanship of Brewster, there was little difference between the models. During World War II, Corsairs shot down 2,140 enemies with 189 losses, for a kill ratio of 11-1. The Navy's first African-American pilot, Ensign Jesse Brown, was a Corsair pilot of VF-32. Brown was shot down and killed in his F4U-4 over North Korea in 1950. Also making him the first black naval aviator to lose his life in combat. Corsairs even claimed a MiG kill when Marine Captain Jesse Folmar earned a Silver Star for shooting down a MiG-15 in 1952. Corsairs were finally phased out of U.S. service following Korea, as jet power took over. The last Corsair to roll off the production line, number 12,571, was an F4U-7 on its way to French naval service in 1953, making it the last piston-engine fighter to be built in the United States. The plane continued to see action around the world, flying with the French in Vietnam in 1954, Egypt in 1956, Tunisia in 1961, and in Algeria from 1955 to 1962. Its final combat was in 1969, flying with both sides in the 100 Hours War between San Salvador and Honduras. So, where are we now? Well, we have flown southeast for a few miles away from Hartford, down to Norwich, Connecticut, and we're now descending over the top of the Thames River as it flows out towards the ocean. You can see the Long Island Sound just out there, and we're heading towards the Groton submarine base and electric boat. Just to our right, passing underneath us by the wing, is the Mohegan Sun Casino, built on the Mohegan Indian Reservation in Uncasville. We're also going to be flying over the Coast Guard Academy in just a minute. The Coast Guard was a huge contributor during World War II. During the war, Coast Guard ships sank 12 German U-boats and 2 Japanese submarines, and they also captured 2 German surface vessels. The landing craft in all of the U.S. amphibious invasions during the war, including Normandy, were operated by Coast Guardsmen. Signalman First Class Douglas Munro earned the Coast Guard's only Medal of Honor in 1942 when he was killed while using his Higgins boat to shield another landing craft full of Marines from Japanese fire. The Coast Guard was originally formed by Congress under the name Revenue Marine in 1790, becoming the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service in the 1860s. The original purpose was collecting customs duties, but in 1915, the service was combined with the U.S. Life-Saving Service and later the U.S. Lighthouse Service to become the modern law enforcement and search and rescue force that we know today. The Academy was built here in 1932, and it's the home of the Eagle, the Coast Guard training vessel. The Eagle came from Germany in 1946 as part of war reparations and is now the United States' only active-duty sailing ship. Across the Thames River is the New London Naval Submarine Base. The base was constructed in 1868 and was named the country's first submarine base in 1916. It's the home of the Submarine Training School, Submarine Medical Research Laboratory, and the Sub-Escape Trainer. U.S. subs in World War II sailed from here to train in the Long Island Sound and the Atlantic Ocean before transferring to the Pacific. At the south end of the base is the USS Nautilus and the Submarine Force Museum. The Nautilus was the first nuclear-powered ship and is also the official state ship of Connecticut. Coming up on our right here, this is Electric Boat, today known as General Dynamics Electric Boat, the Navy's first submarine shipyard. The first Navy submarine, USS Holland, was commissioned in 1900. During World War II, Electric Boat built 74 submarines. In 1952, it was reorganized as the General Dynamics Corporation, and in 1954, it launched the USS Nautilus. Today, it's only one of 2 submarine shipyards in America, the other being Newport News Shipyards in Virginia. Electric Boat has built over 200 submarines since its opening in 1899, while also servicing and repairing the active fleet. We're back out over the Long Island Sound now as we circle around Rocky Neck, heading back west. We're going to follow the coast back to New Haven before jumping south down to Long Island. We're passing the mouth of the Connecticut River now. This is where it comes down and flows into the ocean after starting way up north. And Old Saybrook is the large town out to our left, in front of the wing. I'm going to climb and grab some altitude for the cruise back. Not too high, just a couple thousand feet. And off to the left there, just off the wing, is actually the tip of Long Island. So we're going to parallel that for a bit before we cross over. The mouth of the Long Island Sound is pretty narrow here, as you can see, but it'll expand and become wider as we head west. It's probably at its widest at New Haven, actually. Coming over the mouth of the Mononkatisuk River now, and the Safe Harbor Pilots Point Marina. Guilford and the East River off our starboard wing now, which means that we are almost on top of New Haven. Should be the next stop. Yep, in fact, just out there way ahead of us, I can see the New Haven harbor coming into view. Closing in on the city, there's Tweed New Haven Airport just ahead of us, and the city off to the right on the far side of the Quinnipiac River. Route 95 is down below us to the right, heading west towards New York City, and we'll see Route 91 heading north out of New Haven up towards Springfield, Mass. in just a moment. We'll swing over downtown real quick before we head south out to Long Island. New Haven is the home of Yale University, which is just on the north side of the downtown area, and just off our left wingtip there is the railroad yards and Union Station built by the New Haven Railroad, now serviced by Amtrak. Circling around to the south now, we'll begin our cruise out over the Sound to Long Island itself. One last look at downtown before we go. I can just see Yale. There's a good look at the New Haven station and the interchange, the 91-95 interchange. Coming down over the Sound into Long Island, we're now approaching the Calverton Naval Weapons Industrial Reserve Plant, today known as Calverton Air Park. This was the Tomcat Nursery, where new F-14s would roll into the sun for the first time and make their first flights. In 1956, the Navy purchased 6,000 acres on Long Island for research, development, and manufacturing. This was the site of Grumman's Plant 6 and 7. Plant 6 was the final assembly plant for F-14s, A-6s, EA-6Bs, and E-2s, which were then passed to Plant 7 for flight tests. Earlier Grumman aircraft were also tested here, like the F-9F Panther and Cougar, and the F-11F Tiger. This was also the site of Grumman's mock-up of the lunar surface for testing their lunar rover, a design that ultimately was rejected in favor of Boeing's design. Grumman left Calverton permanently in 1996 after merging with Northrop, and the airport reverted to public use. Today the future of the site is uncertain, as there are several plans to either manufacture solar-powered aircraft there, turn it into a racetrack, or convert it to a solar farm. There's also an ongoing issue of groundwater pollution spreading from the site into the surrounding communities. Streaking out over the Peconic River as we circle by the Long Island Expressway, that's the highway out there just in front of us. We'll circle back around to the right now for one final pass at Calverton. There it is. On the far side of this runway, once we pass over the airbase, we'll go right over the Grumman Memorial Park, which has an F-14 and an A-6 intruder parked on pedestals. There we go, paralleling the runway, facilities off to the right. We'll take one more look at them. We'll say goodbye and pay our respects to Plant 6 and 7. So now we're going to come around, we're going to head west down the island to our next stop, and you saw me readjust the ADF a little bit earlier when we were over Connecticut, dialed in 275, so that's an NDB that's here on the island. We're going to follow that, and actually that's also, funny enough, that's the same frequency of our final NDB that we'll use too, so I won't have to readjust the ADF again, but it is going to bring us to two different places. We're over Brookhaven National Labs, built in 1947 by the Atomic Energy Commission, and specializing in nuclear and high-energy particle physics. It was built on a former Army training post called Fort Upton. The site has been the home of a long line of particle accelerators, and that's one that we're looking at right there over the wing. That's the Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider, which became operational in 2000. The ring is 2.4 miles long, and it's only one of two heavy ion colliders in the world, the other being the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva. Alright, looking at my HSI there, the ADF pointer is just to the left of the nose, so we're going to head towards that, but not quite towards it, because the NDB station is south of where I'm actually trying to go, so we'll let it, well, we'll center it now, and then we'll let it drift off to the left to make sure that we're north of it, so that I actually get where I'm going. Whereover Long Island MacArthur Airport, built in 1942 as Islip Airport and later renamed for General Douglas MacArthur. The Lockheed Corporation had a hangar on site, and it was home to the testing branch of the Sperry Corporation. Lawrence Sperry specialized in gyroscopes, creating the very first artificial horizon, airspeed indicator, the horizontal situation indicator, and the drift indicator. He also designed the very first autopilot in 1912, demonstrating it in 1914 in Paris. During World War II, the Sperry Corporation built gun directors for naval and anti-aircraft guns, as well as the ball turret used on B-17 and B-24 bombers. They also built bomb sights that rivaled, and even surpassed, the famed Norden bomb sights of World War II. The top-secret mystique of Norden bomb sights was a public relations campaign engineered by Norden's president, Theodore Barth. One story was circulated that the aiming reticle on the Norden was so fine that it required the use of human hair from a specific woman named Mary Babnick. Barth also ensured that public theatrics surrounded the bomb sights. During the war, any aircraft on the ground had their sights removed and escorted by armed guards to the Norden lockup on base. Bombardiers had to swear an oath to protect the secrecy of the bomb site, with their lives if need be. However, the Norden bomb site was not actually top secret at all. By the start of the war, its level had been reduced to confidential, while the Sperry bomb site remained top secret and had none of the public exposure of its rival. After the Air Force's leading advocate for Sperry was killed in a plane crash, political wrangling led to the cancellation of the Sperry bomb sights, and Nordens ended up equipping 75% of American bombers. Republic Airport in East Farmingdale, New York, was the headquarters for Republic Aviation from 1939 until 1965. The field was originally opened in 1928 by Fairchild Engine and Airplane Manufacturing Company. Fairchild moved their operations to Maryland in 1931, and Grumman built planes on the airport from 1932 until 1937. A company called Seversky Aircraft arrived in 1935, and they would become Republic Aviation in 1939, acquiring the airfield. The Republic shops were at the north end of the airport, under what is now malls and movie theaters. The P-47 Thunderbolt was born here, another World War II fighter that made use of the R-2800 power plant of the Corsair. P-47 production quadrupled the size of Republic's factory, and even this proved inadequate. Republic built a second factory in Evansville, Indiana in 1942. Farmingdale built 9,000 Thunderbolts during the war. After the war, the factory turned out F-84 Thunderjets and Thunderstreaks for Korea, and beginning in 1955, the F-105 Thunderchief began to roll off the lines. 800 F-105s would fly out of Republic Airport. In 1965, Fairchild bought Republic, and the company ceased to exist. Fairchild would go on to produce the A-10, continuing Republic's naming convention by calling it the Thunderbolt II. With Republic's departure, the airport became a general aviation field in 1966. Circling around over the top of Bethpage Golf Course here, we're going to do a nice little banana pass over Republic Airport. The Republic factory would have been off to our left, just there, in between the two runways, that big space. And then we'll come over Gentle Bank, past the parking area. Nice little profile pass. And off the far side of the airport. Our next stop is real close. We're looking for that golf course once again. That's my visual marker. We're going to hit the golf course and then head just west of that. This was the site of Grummann's Bethpage airfield, location of their headquarters and plants 1 through 3. Moving away from the Republic field, Grumman constructed the Bethpage Airport in 1936. This was the home of the Corsair's chief rival, the F-6F Hellcat. Bethpage Plant 3 produced over 12,000 Hellcats during the war. The company hit its peak in 1986, employing 23,000 people on Long Island. In 1994, with business suffering, Grumman merged with Northrop, and all production on Long Island ceased. Bethpage Airport was abandoned, sitting empty for years. By 2005, most of the footprint was replaced by commercial and industrial development. This big building complex up here with the dark roof, these are former aircraft hangars that are now Grumman Studios, a film and television production center. These were the original facilities that built the Apollo lunar landers. Coming around, we can see the one remaining piece of runway from the old Grumman airfield, and it's right there in that park. It's now a parking area, but that was a smaller, less used runway that actually had Grumman painted on it. The main runway would have been perpendicular with us right now, just under that small road there, heading up to the north, paralleling this big boulevard, or rail line here, rather. And as we come around, we're going to look for an F-14 gate guard just down here next to the road. There it is. F-14 Tomcat in that little park there. That's Felix 101. That is the second to last F-14D ever made. And it was flown to Republic Airport in 2006 and then trucked over here to Bethpage for permanent display. So like I said, those old Apollo hangars are now a movie studio, and you know what movie people love more than anything? They love really loud sounds that come by and ruin their takes and shake their sets. So, let's give them a little salute with a high-powered, low-altitude flyby. What do you think? Here we go, right down on the deck. And rip-roaring right over the site. Outstanding. Vaught's one last middle finger to Grumman. Alright, so with that, we're continuing our trek west. And we're going to head towards New York City. How we doing on fuel? A little under half in the main tank. Not doing too bad considering that we've been doing a lot of high power operations and sort of messing around. That's the Nassau Coliseum down there to our right. There's a parking garage named after Jimmy Doolittle down there. We're going to be coming right over the top of this huge cemetery down here. And just off to the right is Belmont Park, a big double-tracked horse racing facility. And just to our left, yes, there it is, JFK International. And we'll skirt just a little bit to the right of it. We've been busting airspace all day, not talking to anybody, so not too worried now about getting too close to JFK, but we'll get a good look at it without getting too close. And we're going to proceed past it towards Manhattan, and then we're going to break off and actually head down to Floyd Bennett Memorial Field. Floyd Bennett Field was New York City's first municipal airport, built in 1928 to take advantage of the growth of commercial aviation following World War I. While fairly far away from Manhattan, the site was chosen because it was clear of obstacles and could allow seaplanes to dock. The field is named for Floyd Bennett, a Navy pilot who was honored for making the first flight to the North Pole. It's actually very doubtful that Bennett and his co-pilot, Commander Richard Boyd, actually reached the North Pole, but both were honored as heroes in America and received medals of honor. Bennett died of pneumonia while attempting to rescue downed German aviators in Canada in 1928. Floyd Bennett Airport failed to attract airlines and was never a commercial success, mostly because of its distance from the city. However, because of its modern facilities and proximity to the ocean, it saw heavy use by the record-breaking pilots of the interwar period. Air races, speed record trials, cross-country and cross-Atlantic flights all made use of Bennett Field. Wiley Post and Howard Hughes both used the airport to begin and end their around-the-world flights. The Navy took over the airfield during World War II, heavily upgrading it and renaming it Naval Air Station New York. Seaplane hangars and a dirigible landing station were built on site to support reconnaissance patrols against U-boats. In 1970, the Navy closed the air station and the field became a national park. The Coast Guard continued to operate an air station from part of the airfield until 1997, when most of that property also reverted to national park land. Coming around the south side of the island now, we've got a stretch of beach up ahead and to the right, and that is Coney Island Beach, home of the famous Coney Island Amusement Park and hot dogs. And that's it down there to the right. We're just passing over it. Sitting in Long Island City on the bank of the East River at the foot of the Queensboro Bridge is the Brewster Building. Not far from where the original Vought factory was, this is the headquarters of Brewster and Company, a car manufacturer that diversified into aircraft in 1932. This factory building opened in 1911 to assemble chassis for Brewster cars. Today, the building is the headquarters of JetBlue. Brewster was a troubled company. It went out of business in the middle of the war, the height of American industrial output, if that tells you anything. Brewster Carriage Company was founded in 1810 by James Brewster, becoming one of the country's finest coach builders with the slogan, "Carriage Builder for the American Gentleman." This led to automobile construction beginning in 1915. They built their own cars, as well as car bodies for prestigious European imports like Rolls-Royce and Delaunay Belleville. The Depression hit the company very hard, and by 1935 the company was bankrupt. The Brewster Aeronautical Corporation, though, formed in 1932 as a separate division of the company, carried on. Brewster's first plane was a two-seat scout bomber called the SBA, first flying in 1936. The company's next plane was the Brewster F-2A Buffalo, originally the rival of the Grumman Wildcat. The Buffalo was used early in the Pacific War by the U.S. Navy and Marines, the Royal Air Force, and the Dutch. The plane fared terribly against modern Japanese fighters. Only the Finnish Air Force found success with the plane, flying against Soviet aircraft. They produced 36 Buffalo Aces. Brewster, meanwhile, was trying to build these aircraft out of their ex-automobile factory, causing massive delays due to inefficiency. World War II was heating up overseas, and orders were coming in from Brewster's foreign customers. In February 1940, Brewster opened a second plant, this time actually at an airfield, when they leased a large new hangar at Newark Airport. In 1941, after being awarded the Corsair contract, the company built its own airport in Johnsville, Pennsylvania, to hold a third facility. The Johnsville plant was used to make Brewster Buccaneers and F3A Corsairs. However, Johnsville was riddled with problems. Production was slow, constantly missing delivery deadlines, and its quality was horrendously poor. The Buccaneer, a naval scout bomber, was so underpowered and poorly constructed it was considered unsuitable for combat by both the Americans and the British. The planes were mostly used for training and for target towing, and many were scrapped without entering service. The Corsairs were also found to be unsuitable. F3As were habitually delivered behind schedule, and quality control problems were discovered. F3As had to be redlined at a lower airspeed and prohibited from aerobatics completely after several aircraft ripped their wings off in flight. None of the Brewster Corsairs went to frontline units and were also relegated to training duty. The Johnsville plant was one of the most chaotic factories of the war, mired in manufacturing scandals that put the torch to star-spangled images of Americans working as one to defeat fascism. The plant became derisively known as the Bucks County Playhouse, because employees were said to loaf in bathrooms, steal parts and tools, and have sex in half-finished aircraft. Brewster was accused of ignoring Navy production in favor of its foreign contracts, which paid more, and the company was sued by its own stockholders who alleged inflated commissions and other shady business practices. The Navy stepped in and seized control of the Johnsville plant in April of 1942. Labor troubles continued, though. Like many, if not most unions at the time, the Brewster plant had taken a wartime no-strike pledge. Yet they struck anyway in August of 1943, costing the plant the man-hours that would have produced 20 aircraft. Union President Thomas DeLorenzo made a fiery comment to a reporter, saying, "If I had brothers at the front line who needed the 10 or 12 planes that were sacrificed, I'd let them die if necessary to preserve our way of life." The reason for the strike? Guards had not been allowed to choose their posts, either front gate or bathrooms, based on seniority. The strike angered the nation, and even a pro-labor newspaper called it the most disgusting strike in the history of this country. It sparked a congressional investigation of the factory, which only managed to magnify the outrage. Outright sabotage was traced to workers that led to Buccaneers losing rudder control or engines that would not shut off. Rival shifts hid tools from each other. $50,000 worth of tools and materials were stolen every year, carried right past the guards, who were, apparently, too upset about guarding the bathroom to actually be doing their jobs. Management and quality assurance were inept. When supervisors found tools left over in finished planes, their crazy solution was to build a giant device to flip planes and shake loose bolts and tools. The Navy canceled its contracts with Brewster, scrapping most of the Buccaneers and ending Corsair production after only 700 units. Johnsville workers, suddenly motivated, staged a stay-in protest, refusing to leave work and producing a record 8 aircraft in one day. The Navy ignored them and closed the plant. The Brewster Company went bankrupt in the fall of 1944, being officially dissolved by its shareholders in 1946. So here we are, this is it. This is Brewster Airfield, later known as Johnsville Naval Air Station. After Brewster went under in 1944, the Navy retained control of Brewster Field, which they renamed to Johnsville. It became a modification center for aircraft before they were sent to the fleet. Vought Corsairs were flown here from Stratford for modifications. Following World War II, the site switched to research and development, becoming the Naval Air Development Center, Warminster, with over 1 million square feet of laboratory space. Experimental missiles were produced on the base and tested against F-6F Hellcat drones. The base was closed down in 1996, its research being transferred to San Diego and Maryland. A domed underground facility on site was used for maintenance on inertial navigation systems for aircraft and submarines, and is still operated by Penn State Applied Research Lab. The rest of the airfield has been demolished and replaced with community parks, residential neighborhoods, and the Ann's Choice Retirement Community Complex. Coming around to the north side of the field here, the Brewster factory buildings would have been underneath this corner of the retirement home down here. And they were bulldozed pretty early by the Navy, basically once the war was over. So the nice folks over at Grumman Studios were real happy with us earlier. You know who else loves really loud sounds that shake the whole building? Old people! So let's finish off this tour with a final salute to Brewster and the nice people of Ann's Choice. We'll do a nice final high-speed pass. Up over the top, looking for the runway. Full power, full RPM. Trimming the elevators to keep the nose right where I want it. Here we go, coming right over the threshold. And up and over. And as we level out, you'll notice we're right on top of an airfield. Just next door to Johnsville was another Naval Air Station, Willow Grove. It was opened in 1926 by Harold Pitcairn, aircraft designer. The Pitcairn Mail Wing was designed and test flown at Willow Grove. The Mail Wing was flown extensively by the U.S. Postal Service from 1927 until the mid-30s. Pitcairn was also very interested in autogyros, developing and perfecting several models during the 1930s. Willow Grove was taken over by the military with the start of World War II, using it for anti-submarine warfare programs. During the Cold War, it became a training base for reserves of all of the military branches. As part of recruitment efforts, the base annually hosted one of the largest air shows on the East Coast until 2006. The base was closed in 2011, and the land turned over to the county for eventual redevelopment. So actually we have one more stop on this tour. We're heading back now to Trenton Mercer Airport, which we overflew on the way into Brewster. So now we're doubling back, heading back out of Pennsylvania into New Jersey, and we'll circle to land at Trenton. Trenton Mercer Airport first opened in 1929 as Skillman Airport in West Trenton, New Jersey. In 1938, General Motors opened an auto manufacturing facility adjacent to the airport called the Inland Fisher Guide Plant. Originally producing body moldings, door handles, and other interior components for GM cars, the plant switched production with the start of the war. The Trenton plant was one of 5 GM plants in the area that shifted to producing TBM Avengers, the General Motors license-built version of the Grumman torpedo bomber. Modular sub-assemblies arrived at the plant via the Reading Railroad, and finished Avengers were rolled out to Skillman Airport where they were flight tested. The first TBM flew in September 1942, and a total of 7,800 would be built at the site, including George Bush's aircraft in which he was shot down over the Pacific. Following the war, the plant and the airport were returned to civilian control. The plant went back to making car parts, and the airport was renamed Mercer County Airport. The GM plant would in 1961 become the first commercial factory in the U.S. to use an industrial robot. The plant was closed in 1998 and the site demolished. Airspeed creeping up to 250 knots. Looking for the airport now. We're coming around, looking to get lined up with runway 24. There I can see the approach lights. We're going to make a highly modified military approach. This is going to be more like an air show approach. We're going to come in about 100 feet wide open and then do a pull-up and brake into the landing pattern. Then we'll come around and we'll land. A real overhead 360 would be anywhere from 800 to 1,000 feet above the field, but we're going to get right down on the deck for maximum wow factor. Coming up on the airport boundary, air's real rough over the top of these trees. Just 100 feet. There's the landing area for 2-4. Looks clear, winds in our direction. In the brake, holding 2 Gs, throttle is idle. We're looking for 200 knots to start dropping gear and flaps. And there we go, we're under it. Gear down, flaps down to 20 as we roll out on downwind. And we'll let that speed come down. I'm pitching up constantly. And just off the left wingtip is the old GM plant as we're circling around it. And there we're on downwind, continuing to constantly trim up, pitching for speed, letting it come down to an approach speed of about 100 knots. There's full flaps. We're just a beam of the touchdown point. Normally I would turn in right there, but we'll go a few seconds longer, then we'll start our turn, which will give us just a little bit longer final approach. Checking for traffic right. Looks good. We'll turn to final in just a second here. That completes today's Corsair tour. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed learning some things and visiting some famous sites. It's really surprising how much aviation history is in the area of the Northeast, especially related to the war, and I feel like I keep discovering more and more. So there was a bunch of things on this trip that I learned for this video that I actually didn't even know before, so I'm always learning more, and I like that a lot. Flight Simulator is a cool way to explore things and areas, and there are some other places in the country that I'd maybe like to make some more videos on, so who knows, maybe we'll see those at some point in the future. But that's it for today. I'm just going to taxi in and shut down now, so once again, happy birthday to the F4U Corsair, and I'll see you next time.